Welcome to The Future Unleashed from Lincoln College, Oxford. I'm your host, Helen O'Hara, and joining me today is Emily Mortimer, the actress, writer, director, film producer. Emily has been working in film and TV since essentially being spotted while she was still a student at Lincoln, and has gone on to huge success in the film and TV industry. She's worked with directors like Martin Scorsese and Kenneth Branagh. She's worked with TV showrunners like Aaron Sorkin. You might have seen her in Notting Hill, Shutter Island, Mary Poppins Returns. You may have caught her directorial debut for the BBC, The Pursuit of Love, in 2021, her own adaptation of the Nancy Mitford classic. And she joins us on a break from a film she's currently shooting with Noah Baumbach, George Clooney, and Adam Sandler. Today, we are in Lincoln's upper senior common room. Now, this is a space that has worked very, very hard in the college's history. For a long time, this was the college chapel until about the 17th century. And it then spent 300 years or so as the college's library until the turn of the 20th century. It's now enjoying a well-earned rest as the senior common room where the fellows can meet and hang out and chat. So, welcome back to Oxford, Emily.
Thank you for having me.
So I have to ask you about being spotted while you were here.
Yeah.
Was it in a performance of Kafka's The Trial?
Yes, it was a very sort of serious production that was mounted by Tom Hooper, who then went on to become a big Hollywood director who directed The King's Speech. Yeah. Even back then, very fiercely ambitious mover and shaker, and he had put on this production at the Oxford Playhouse of Stephen Berkoff's adaptation of Kafka's The Trial, so there was a lot of mime and movement involved, and we were sort of just a group of quite sort of hungover students that were really not that engaged. We did manage to sort of muster something that was good enough for an agent to come and see me and write me a note, and which I read in my pigeon post, as in the lodge. I will never forget opening this letter from an agent, like the week later, saying, I came to Oxford to see my daughter and I came and saw your play and I really would love to represent you. I was just like, oh my God, one of the best moments of my life.
But I mean, you've been acting now for, 20 years? I know you've been writing for as long as you've been acting or longer.
Yes.
But it recently feels like you've evolved more towards maybe writing and also into directing and producing as well. So how did that kind of shift come about for you?
I just think I always wrote ever since I was little. My dad was a writer, a playwright and a novelist, as well as a criminal defense barrister. And so I had always kind of grown up around him and his love for the theatre and his love for just the world of just storytelling. I always kind of did it. I was quite a shy, self-electedly lonely child. And so I kind of wrote plays and put on sort of ridiculous sort of performances on the stairs for my parents and pretended to be Delia Smith cooking. And that was my way of kind of being company for myself, I suppose. And so acting became a way of kind of actually having friends. Like I remember at college, because I was still extremely shy, it was a way of sort of being in a community without having to kind of, I don't know, you were just put together and then you became friends and you had this common cause, and it just sort of made the business of socializing much less stressful somehow. And that sort of took over a little bit from writing, but I always did it. And then it was when I was doing the newsroom, the Aaron Sorkin show, me and my friend Dolly Wells, my best childhood friend, who's also an actor and a writer and a director, we got together to write this show, Doll and M, a TV show for HBO and Sky here, all about a kind of dysfunctional friendship between two women and what happens when one woman gets her best friend to be her personal assistant, and the answer is absolutely everything goes terribly wrong. I'd found myself in Los Angeles doing the newsroom, acting this very kind of high-powered news producer in this very sort of intensely kind of pressurized environment. Wonderful, but it was also sort of scary in some ways. And this kind of thing with Dolly was somehow like this antidote to it that I did at the same time. And wow. I think Dolly and I both realized by writing something and being the kind of inventor behind it, you can control your environment a bit more and make it how you'd like
Want
it to be. And that was really the beginning of this whole other part of my life. But it really came from like just trying to write something with my best friend as a kind of antidote to just being like terrified of my life.
But that's funny, because I was going to ask about control, because it feels like that's the key, isn't it, with being a writer and director? You know, I mean, from what I know about acting, it's a lot of being at other people's direction all the time, almost by definition.
Yes.
So has that helped you kind of like regain a sense of, you know, mastery, I guess, over your own life?
It's been so interesting. It's kind of coincided with, as I've started to write and direct, my kind of, I don't know, middle age, I suppose. Like I'm definitely not young anymore. And this feeling of, you know, that you can be in control of your own destiny in a way that, as an actor, but also maybe as a woman, I don't know. It's hard to separate the two, but I think you're very infantilized as an actor anyway. I know that for sure. You're basically not trusted to go to the loo on your own on a film set. You're literally given pocket money in a brown paper envelope to spend. Someone comes and picks you up in a car because they don't trust you to get to work on time on your own. You're given your lunch, you're sort of followed wherever you go in case you kind of run away, you know, and you start believing that you are basically effectively a child. But actually to be an actor, I've realized now, since I've been kind of on the other side of the camera, as I do that more and more and look at actors, I've got so much more respect for this thing that people do, and it's an incredibly difficult skill and craft and art, and at any given time I do really truly believe that the most difficult thing that anybody is doing on a film set is acting and performing, and it requires all sorts of different skills at once, and you have to be extraordinarily relaxed as well as extremely focused. But you also have to have these skills of a kind of writerly directorial skills, which I didn't realize when that was all I did. I was using these same skills, these storytelling skills as an actor, that have then now found their way into what I do as a writer and a director too. You have to know how to kind of edit a scene when you're performing in a scene. You have to know what bits to sort of hide, or where to cut out the emotion, where to lay on the emotion, where the rhythm of it, you know, and how also to pace a whole performance over the course of a film or a television series or whatever it may be. Like that, these are all storytelling skills that are the same skills I realize now as I write and I direct. But doing those things has made me, it really has given me more confidence to feel like, no, I'm not just an infant that needs to be followed to go to the loo.
So it feels maybe like an evolution then. Has that kind of helped has the confidence come a little bit as a director, as a writer?
Definitely.
As you've continued doing it?
Yeah, I think it really has. And it was such a crazy sort of amazing bit of good luck that I ended up directing The Pursuit of Love. I had always written, as I said, all my life, but I'd never directed anything. And that happened because Lily James, who was starring in The Pursuit of Love and had already been attached to do it, and I'd written these scripts, and we'd started talking, and I, you know, had talked about how it might be and how fun it was going to be and all this, and she was meeting directors, and none of them were really kind of chiming with her, and then she told the producers that she would only do it if I directed it, which was complete surprise. I had no idea that was coming, and I'm still sort of flabbergasted that that's what happened, but she did, and then and they had to agree because she was the sort of money behind the operation. If she was not going to do it, then the whole thing would fall apart. So she sort of, you know, opened this door for me, and I had this moment where I kind of like decided to walk through it. And I didn't really know that I could do it. I sort of had a feeling I might be able to, but I didn't know for sure because I'd never done it before. And I had a little bit at the beginning a feeling of impostor syndrome that I think is probably true of a lot of women in my position. It's historically, being a director is not a female thing. It's been historically just much more sort of populated by men, that side of the industry, and then there suddenly was this moment where everybody was looking for women directors because it was kind of the thing, you know, and I felt like, oh my God, I'm getting this opportunity as a result of sort of extreme positive discrimination and Lily, and this wouldn't have happened 10 years ago, and it's just sort of good luck, you know, I'm just in the right place at the right time, I had to battle with that feeling a bit and listen to the little voice inside that is saying, I sort of do know how to do this, you know. When I think about it, I'd written a script that was incredibly bossy. Like I'd put all the music in, I knew basically what all the shots were, I knew what the costumes were going to be like. It would have been really annoying for anyone having to come and direct it, you know, because it was all sort of there for them, and I'd really sort of laid it all out, and I did know, I guess, and that's kind of probably what Lily was responding to, but it took a bit of a battle in my mind. So I took that opportunity, I walked through that door, I battled with the demons in my head telling me that I didn't necessarily know what I was doing, and I found that I just had the most amazing experience of my life as a director of that. It was amazing, and I'm so, yes, it has given me much more confidence. Yes.
But it's really interesting that you say that, because first of all, you're not the first female director I've heard that from. I've talked to several others who had to be essentially pushed into taking that first job.
Right.
But also, I mean, you worked with Nicole Holofcener like quite early in your career,
Yes.
like Lovely and Amazing
Yes.
was a big film in terms
Yes.
of getting your name out there in the
Yes.
US. And yet you haven't, I guess, encountered many female directors since. It is still quite a
male-dominated world.
Yeah,
and also in the years that since Doll and M, you know, which was over 10 years ago anyway, what has been the kind of traditional area, women's stories weren't necessarily seen as universal stories, which is so crazy, because you tell a story about something specific, and the more specific it is, the more universal it becomes. And if you're telling a story about two female friends, that's everybody's story, but sort of generally that's understood in other areas. But for some reason, women's stories were considered then sort of chick lit, and that has changed, and really, I think that's made a big difference to the industry, to women who are writing as novelists, as screenwriters, as, you know, the kind of stories that are being told by women are not necessarily seen as just sort of women's stories.
Yes.
And so that's something that is very exciting and is still evolving. Barbie, for example, is a really good example of, you know, a massive, huge feat on the part of Greta Gerwig, and something that, like, I mean, it was successful off the charts on levels that, you know, are unimaginable, and it still suffers. I think I don't think she's still being lauded in the same way as she would be if she was a guy that had done that. But anyway, but still, the glass ceilings are being broken all over the place, and it is very exciting.
That was something I was going to ask you about, because it feels like MeToo and Time's Up have started this conversation, at least, and as you say, kind of open doors. People are looking now for female directors in a way that they maybe weren't before, and now it's a question of when some of those things hit, and when some of those things are successful, then that actually kind of widens the crack in the door, maybe,
yes,
right?
Definitely. It is amazing to have got to sort of, as I said, I think to be women of sort of my generation, where I'm 52, you know, where you, in the last 10 years since MeToo, since all of it, you know, a sea change has happened that has really sort of changed me. And I'm sure that's true for so many women. Like, I didn't really realize how lacking in confidence and belief that I could sort of do things I was, until the world showed me that and gave me these opportunities. And it's kind of crazy and amazing and wonderful, and it's very exciting to be a 52-year-old woman suddenly kind of feeling quite like coming into their whatever, like just, you know, I even have a trouble saying it, but coming into their power or whatever, it feels like sort of a corny thing to say, but it's true.
You're right, it has been a physical mental shift. Like I remember when MeToo started to happen, the first couple of stories I was like, well, it'll blow over like it always does.
Yes.
And then you suddenly realize, no, it shouldn't blow over. It's really important. And it does feel like the mental shift has happened and now we're sort of beginning to see the results steamroller on. I don't know if that's how you see it, that's how it feels from within the industry.
Yes.
But it kind of feels like this is kind of a progressing thing.
Definitely. I definitely think that things are really changing. You just have to be on a film set to see all these different conventionally male jobs, you know, like the clapper loader, the focus puller, the DP is often a woman now. That was never the case when I was young. And the director and editors, and it really is changing in a way that is really cool and really exciting. Equally with the things that one writes and directs and wants to put on, well, it's important to me anyway to be very excited by this moment, be very excited by these opportunities that are coming, but also to remain like very rigorous in the kind of thing that the stories I'm trying to tell, so that they're not just sort of, kind of ticking a box.
It kind of reminds me of, I mean, you talked around the time of The Pursuit of Love about how uncompromising Nancy Mitford was as a writer and how she had this just really strong, particular voice. She didn't care who she offended. She didn't care what you thought of it. This is what she's going to say.
Yeah.
You know, is that something that is difficult to communicate now in particularly in, you know, a very difficult, I think, world to make movies and TV? There's a lot of voices kind of shouting at you, I think, all the time. There's a lot of voices on social media, like out there reacting in real time when you're doing something. You know, is it difficult to kind of tune all that out and still get that kind of vision across? Yes,
I think it is difficult, but I think it becomes a kind of imperative. Like it becomes almost a sort of reason to do it, is to try to be fearlessly committed to kind of an honest expression of something, and that doesn't mean to not be thoughtful. It just means being unafraid of the kind of noise, yes, and that sort of moral sanctimony that you find everywhere, but that is at the antithesis of kind of art. Part of what you're doing as an actor or as a filmmaker or as a storyteller of any kind is, you know, showing other human beings what it is to be a human being, or talking about what it is to be a human being. And what it is to be a human being is a very complicated thing, and human beings are not good at being sensible, about knowing what to say, about what's right, what's wrong. You know, everybody's in a muddle, and I think that what I'm interested in anyway is exploring the muddle and kind of like trying to just present the muddle in a way that feels recognizable and own the muddle. And we live in a world which is everybody shouting about what's right and what's wrong. But I think that it is scary, but it becomes, as I said, all the more important to try. Yeah, I mean, Nancy Mitford had the benefit of being this kind of aristocratic girl who sort of comes from sort of generations and a family and thousands of years of not giving a toss about what people thought, because you know, and so there's this kind of delicious kind of shamelessness about the way that she writes, where she just is very honest and true and funny and shocking sometimes, and it's such a relief. That really feels like medicine to read. It feels so kind of particularly shocking in this moment to go back to a book like The Pursuit of Love. And she's dealing with big things. She's dealing with, you know, the Second World War and fascism, but seen through this female lens that is to me very radical. Like, and it was really, I think it was really good for me to be able to speak through her voice as my first kind of thing, because her voice is much braver than mine. And so to just have to use her voice as my first sort of foray out into the world as a director was really quite good for me, I think.
I mean, you use the word radical there, and I think that is something that's really interesting because women's stories, just telling a story from a woman's point of view is still something that's relatively rare and still feels quite radical, especially on the big screen, but also, I mean, to a lesser degree on the small screen.
Yes.
I think it's always been a bit more equal than maybe in film has. But is this something that we can sort of hope for going forward, that there is going to be this exploration of more points of view, of more, interesting ways of being human, because surely we're done now with the straight, cis, white, able-bodied men who have been like 80% of film protagonists for the past, 80 or 100 years.
Yes, I think so. I definitely think that going forward things feel very exciting, and I think that what's happened in the industry is, particularly in the television industry, but also to an extent in film, it was like a kind of a gold rush, Wild West feeling in the sort of television landscape. There was just so much, and so much was being made, and so much money was being poured in. There was just glut of sort of content, which is this most horrible word, but it's true. It does sort of describe it in this kind of awful way. Like, there's just so much stuff. Then there was this big strike, and there's been this whole kind of sort of configuration of things, and we still don't quite know what is at the end of all of that. We're emerging from this kind of reset moment, I think. But it feels like in order for things to be seen above the noise and heard, and that people are going to have to really be finding kind of their really authentic voices, not just female voices, but men's voices too, and whatever, anyone's voices. They have to be really strong and authentic and themselves in a way that is actually the measure of something being good. And so I'm hoping now that this kind of, that's what's maybe going to happen. It's funny, I've just been watching Talented Mr. Ripley. I don't know if you've seen
the Andrew Scott.
The Andrew Scott one. It was just exciting to me, whatever you think of the show, but I felt like just the way it's been shot, it looks like a sort of Antonioni film or something, like that. Robert Elswit, the great cinematographer, has been using these shots in this Netflix show that are just so beautiful and artful and arresting, and it's all in black and white, and maybe it's imperfect. I don't know. I need to sort of get to the end of it. But I was just like, oh, this is exciting. Like, I feel like audiences are becoming more and more sophisticated. They've seen so much. They've had so much access to so much. They've more of an appetite than maybe, executives and the kind of studios give them credit for. But I think they might be starting to see a sea change now, where there's an appetite for things to be inventive and interesting and new and fresh and genuine expressions of something in a kind of original and artful way. And I think that I do feel personally kind of optimistic about the way that the industry is going. I do feel that there's been a huge democratization of films and television and the way people watch things that is ultimately good, even though there's been a lot of confusion.
And I think it feels like in cinema they're moving away from endless remakes, sequels, reboots, maybe to something a little bit more emphasizing original filmmakers, like Greta Gerwig with Barbie, like Christopher Nolan with Oppenheimer.
Yes. And there's a yearning for more and more of that, and to kind of to tune out the noise and to get back to the craft of sort of filmmaking. And we're so over, the technology has got so good now, but it's become uninteresting to us, I think. And hence this Marvel stuff is becoming less and less exciting to people. I think more and more we want something that feels real and authentic. And I think partly that was why Barbie was such a huge, huge hit, because it was so delightful, it was so entertaining, but also it was real. Like, there were no effects. It was just in a studio with lights and, great music and great costumes, like an old school dance routines, and like it was just old school, but done in this delightful and vivacious way, and a billion more people went to see it. So and went to see it in the cinema. You know, this is really hopeful.
And what about with your production company? You know, do you have, I don't know, do you strategize with what you look for, or is it really kind of a guts, passion project kind of feeling when you're trying to?
Yeah, I think no, there's no real strategy. I think that maybe that's another lesson that me and my husband, who's also an actor and a producer, Alessandro Nivola, I think that we have kind of seen it so much from the other side of being actors for so many years, where the things that you're in that feel like they've been made cynically or never work, like the things that are made because there was another film about, I don't know, like whatever it is, that worked, and therefore the executives at the studio decided that realized they wouldn't get fired if they commissioned another one because no one was going to blame them for trying to kind of copy the thing that was a hit. It's too much hard work. Like, you really have to love something to be able to will it into existence as a producer. I mean, it's years of your life, and it requires absolute kind of, you know, mad sort of passion for the thing, that insane enthusiasm for the thing that you couldn't fake.
So I think this might answer my next question, but I'm interested then in your take on, you know, there were reports that AI has been used by studios to essentially pick their next films, that they think they can predict what will be a success and what will not be. But presumably that has to be based on what has been a success in the past, and it must therefore exacerbate exactly what you're talking about,
right?
Right?
To me, that's just absurd. The heyday of kind of the film industry really was, whereas in living memory, was the sort of 70s, when these studios were making some of the great movies of all time, and the bosses were not money people. They were creative producers. They were people that, of course, they cared about money, but they wanted to sort of encourage artists, to encourage, you know, Coppola, Scorsese, and all these people to make these great films, and trying to run it as a business. I don't think that works, because it's not. It's the worst business. Like, there's no, you know, it's a terrible gamble. Like, you can't, and anyone who's investing in a film is like, that's the worst investment you could ever make, because the chances of it making any money are so slim. But you've got more chance if it's something that has been at some level come from a real voice trying to tell a real story and trying to communicate something that is meaningful, and the studio execs are putting their faith in that voice rather than trying to follow the zeitgeist.
Well, I mean, okay, so the 70s kind of followed a crisis of confidence, I think, for the studios in the 60s. You know, the old model had stopped working. You know, they were trying to make all these like big epics, like Around the World in 80 Days, and they all flopped because they were all dreadful. Like, let's be optimistic. We're looking to the future. Is it possible that something like that happens again, that the studios realize, okay, the sequels model isn't working, we need to do something else? And they do what they did in the 70s. They hand the keys of the kingdom to a bunch of passionate, gifted young filmmakers.
I hope so. I do think that is possible, and I do think that audiences are kind of showing the way. I think that Barbie and Oppenheimer too was a really good example of that, because Oppenheimer was really a kind of straight, old-fashioned film. The sort of combination of this moment of a kind of like everything got sort of run amok, and now we're kind of resetting and trying to work out what it is that we want, or, you know, what we need, and the feeling of just kind of being in a cinema and not being able to be on your phone and just being in this kind of dark space with other people does really feel like somewhere that I personally want to be. And I don't think it's because I've always loved going to the movies. I feel like it just feels like more than ever like a necessary place to be.
So we're asking everybody as well, how would you describe Lincoln in 3 words?
Beautiful, unstuffy, kind. I think that Lincoln is really one of the most beautiful colleges there is. I really do. It's perfect. It's just, you come in here every time and you can't quite believe it's real. It's the most perfect proportions. It's in the little perfect little spot on the towel, right in the center of it all. It's very tucked away, but it just, to me, it never felt forbidding or foreboding. It always felt welcoming and kind and easy. It never felt too scary to me. It felt nice and welcoming, and that you were going to be okay, you know. And I still feel that feeling today, and I encourage anyone to really seriously consider Lincoln as a place to be, because it's very conducive to good spirits.
That's a good 3 words. Yeah, I like that. And obviously in this series we're kind of focusing on the future. So as stewards of the future, I suppose what advice would you give, the young people who are just at Lincoln or coming to Lincoln today?
Advice that I wish I had given myself or been given when I was young was think less about pleasing other people and more about what pleases you. I think that works for every area of your life. Love and work and study, and I think that it's taken me, as I said, 52 years to kind of even begin to think about trying to work out what I'm interested in, and I think that actually that makes you weirdly, paradoxically, a more generous person if you're not trying to kind of fit in or please other people or do things a certain way because you'll get good marks or somebody might approve of you. You end up being a more curious person, a more present person, and a more kind of happy person, and then a nicer person to be around. So I would say, yes, it's very high pressure being here, of course, and it's important to work hard and also have a good deal of fun and get drunk and go to parties and enjoy yourself, because that's really a very important part of this experience. But also just really be rigorous about trying to find the things that really, really interest you, and put much more emphasis on that than exams and getting good marks, and because those things will come. The minute you're doing something you love, all the rest of it comes. But I think one can get so distracted by being approved of and doing well, and especially high achieving students they've probably done that their whole lives, and there comes a point where that sort of runs out. You just have to just love the thing. If you can nurture the kind of passion for the thing as early as possible, I think it will be really beneficial. So that's what my advice would be, as well as going to lots of parties.
Emily Mortimer, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.